Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Danny Plauger. I'm the incoming Executive Director of Virginia Transit Association. I want to welcome everybody to the third VTA and DRPT Lunch and Learn virtual webinar series. VTA is incredibly excited about this partnership and the opportunity to offer our members and the Commonwealth Transit community a deeper dive into the planning challenges, issues, and processes with insight from the experts at DRPT and our business members. This webinar series would not be possible without the support, partnership, and expertise of DRPT, especially Alan and Bethel. Today's program is reviewing cost estimating, which is the prediction of the quantity and cost of the resources needed to accomplish an investment option, activity, asset, or project. As always, if you have any questions during the presentation, please put them in the Q&A box and I'll ask them at the appropriate time. Now, in this afternoon, I have the pleasure of introducing our partners in this webinar series and today's presenters. Bethel supports DRPT's Northern Virginia office in Alexandria. She's a graduate of the University of Virginia and licensed professional engineer in the Commonwealth. She began her career at VDOT, and since joining DRPT in 2022, she supports many of Virginia's largest transit facility engineering and construction projects, administers DRPT's GIS-based construction project program management portal, and is an accomplished project manager, smart scale guru, and is focusing on no emissions infrastructure, including EV charging infrastructure. Alan manages DRPT statewide engineering program. He graduated from VNI and has a 30-year career both in the private and public sectors, working on structural engineering and transportation construction projects. Prior to joining DRPT, Alan worked at VDOT, rising to the role of Louisa Residency Engineer. In his current role, he has been assisting the progression of projects from feasibility to construction, as well as working very closely with DGS and VDOT to streamline transit shelter policies and procedures to support the goals of each transit agency. And our special guest today, Nee, is with MVP. She has more than 30 years of U.S. and overseas experience in construction and construction management and serves as MBP's Project Controls Service Executive. She has extensive experience in cost estimating, cost management, earned value management, value engineering studies, CPM scheduling, and claims analysis. She's also a certified cost professional, an earned value professional, a certified construction manager, and her experience includes new and renovation of buildings, bus rapid and rail transit projects, bridges, and highways. Her role has also included construction management, administration and management of contracts, management of budgets, cost estimating, change management with a specialized expertise on rail and transit projects. So please grab your lunch, sit back, and enjoy a great program from Alan, Bethel, and Nee. Thank you. I'll turn it over to you, Alan.
Okay, great. Thank you, Danny. And good afternoon, everyone. We walk through real quick our series. The goal of this webinar series was to really promote Bethel and me and DRPT as a resource to you. Our director, Jennifer DeBrule, has really empowered us to support you and set you up for success. When we started, our primary focus is construction projects and other transit and rail facilities. And we began to see opportunities to generate awareness about the project development and delivery process, particulars about projects like cost estimates and other value engineering, delivery methods, design, build, and design, bid, build, and so on. So we're very grateful for VTA allowing us to partner in this series to really take a quick dive. Some of these series, we go over a lot of content in a hurry. So the goal is to impress upon you how much there is to know, and most importantly, that there are resources there to help you. You don't need to know all of these things. Between the VTA memberships like MVP and the members there with Nee and here, Bethel and me, we're here to support you. So we take some time. If you have any questions, please let us know, and we look forward to continuing to support you in this series. All right. Oh, there we go. Okay. Nee.
Thank you. So what is cost estimating? It is the prediction of the quantity and costs of the resources needed to accomplish a particular investment, an asset, a project, an activity. Cost estimating is an iterative process. It's something that we perform at various stages of development of any particular asset or project. The cost estimate is often used to determine economic viability of a project, to evaluate possible alternatives for that project, to establish the scope, the budget, and also in developing the basis of project cost control and project schedule control. As you see from this illustration on the slide, developed by AAC International, every time we prepare a cost estimate, we combine resources, available resources, material, labor, equipment. We take that along with money and the time that we have, and then cost elements such as form work, temporary facilities, temporary items, safety items. We combine all of that into producing the asset or the project or the activity. Next.
All right, so the goals that you should have for each cost estimate and for your program as a whole is to be consistent, accurate, and reliable. Your cost estimates often are going to end up becoming your project or your program budgets, like Nini just mentioned. They're going to provide the framework for your spending plans that inform your teams, your leadership. And so they help guide, the decisions that you make about the feasibility of a project and the funding requests that you'll have to make on like the federal, state, and local levels. And so from one estimate to the next, it's going to be important that you have the same cost estimating process and methods that you use, because this ensures that there's consistency, so that whether it's you that develops an estimate, your colleague, a consultant does it, there won't be large variabilities between like what each of you guys produce. And then of course, everyone wants their estimates to be accurate. We want to know that the amounts that we estimate are actually going to be what it takes to complete a project. But while it's really impossible to be 100% accurate with your estimate, especially in the early stages of feasibility and scope, it is possible to progressively reduce risk and contingency over time as the design advances and develop an estimate that's reliable for you and your team. Next.
All right, in our April webinar, we talked about construction project development and delivery. And one of the key items that we did talk about was the importance and significance of a project management plan. Having a plan from conception of the project to feasibility through design, preparing contract documents, and into construction. The project management plan lays out the steps for delivering a project all the way through to commissioning. And one key piece of that project management plan, or P&P, is the cost management plan. And it too begins at the inception of the project. As soon as you have a concept, it's very important to have a plan to develop first a conceptual estimate to seek approval to advance the project. Identify who can help you prepare your estimate. The industry has many experts like Nyi, and we have a lot of resources here at DRPT that can help you at all stages of the project develop your cost estimates. It's very important to know where that cost estimate is going to live. In the event that one of you wins the lottery or moves on or takes a promotion in another position, someone else needs to pick up that estimate and carry the torch. In order for your estimate to be sustainable over the many years in the project life cycle, it needs to be stored somewhere that's safe and secure, where someone can understand the provenance of the estimate. How did we get to where we are today? And then how can they carry the torch moving forward? Who will approve your cost estimate? That's very important too, whether it's a town council or board of supervisors or the Department of Rail and Public Transportation. When to update your cost estimate. All of these things are critical to having a reliable, valuable estimate for your project, and you need to have a plan for that. Your plan, just like the estimate, will evolve over time, but having that cost management plan from the beginning of the project is critical. You define the estimate's purpose and your estimating plan. Evaluate risk and contingencies, and we'll talk about that a little more in the next slide. Documenting and adopting the estimate. Documenting your assumptions and identifying what's going to be included, and then updating the estimate over time. All of those things are very important. And along the way, we have gone through in our industry over the past several years a pandemic that was unforeseen, inflation, escalation numbers that could have never been anticipated in early 2019. And updating your estimates to reflect changes, even those that you can't anticipate, is critical. The estimates are what they are, and making sure that you include contingencies and have a plan to update your estimate and pass the torch throughout the project lifecycle is critical. I did take this, I'll note at the end of the presentation as a reference, the Government Accountability Office has an incredible guidance document on developing estimates. So even though some of your projects may not be FTA funded, the GAO document and the note in the lower left corner, the GAO 195G, if you Google that, it's a great reference and provides a great template for your cost management plan. Okay, Danny.
So to define the estimate's purpose, as Alan has very well clearly laid out for us, in order to define the purpose as well as the characteristics of your cost estimate, you must understand your project. You must understand the level of maturity. In other words, the project definition at any particular time. At the very beginning, in those early feasibility stages, project definition is at the minimum. Our cost estimate's purpose at that point in time will be limited to helping us screen various alternatives at a strategic level so that you can take that to the management and make a decision on what you can build, what you can create, what you can develop. As the project documents are developed from narratives, sketches, into concept plans, reports, drawings, specifications, then your project becomes more defined. And that allows us to be able to use our estimates for more, such as for detailed planning, for concept development, for the development of a budget, to seek funding sources, to seek funding from different sources, as well as to get authorization of those funds. Subsequently, we can use the cost estimate to develop the cost and the schedule at various design phases as well, such as the design development phase for procurement of not only the work itself, but the consultants that are going to do the work. All of that is included in your cost estimate. The owner's cost, the owner's project management, the consultants that the owner holds, the consultants that need to complete the design for the project, as well as the contractor and subcontractors. And everything that you need also during the execution of your project. AAC International identifies cost estimates in classes. It has 5 classes, classes 1 through 5. Next. On the left here is a chart from AAC International that is called the classification matrix. At class 5, which is at the top of the table, and this is the point where you have the least definition of your project. Our cost estimate, as I mentioned, is used for screening, for feasibility studies. The efforts needed to prepare the cost estimate at that level are usually much lower than what you will need later on. At the same time, the cost estimate accuracy ranges are much wider here because you don't know enough of the scope of your project. But as you move down the classes from 5 to 4 to 3 to 2 and to 1, your project definition increases. You know better about your project. You know more about your project. The efforts for developing your cost estimate will increase because you now have more details, more drawings, more specifications, more reports to consider. At the same time, you're able to reduce the accuracy range of your estimate. It becomes narrower because now that you have more information about the project, you have more details to be able to fine-tune what it will cost to construct, what it would cost to design your project. Next.
So these are some examples of what kinds of things you would identify for your project as you define the scope. Most of these do relate to roadway projects like bus rapid transit, but I think it does help paint a picture of the types of things that should be considered as you flesh out your scope and define the parameters of your estimate. And so like you'll need to understand the full project limits, construction easements, drainage easements, maintenance of traffic. You'll have to identify all the utilities that are going to be affected, whether something needs to be resized or relocated. You'll have to note what enhancements you want to include on the project. Are there going to be, like it says, brick pavers, special pavers, decorative items? Do you have any really innovative elements that you want to implement for your design? And I also want to add that, typically projects are driven by your operational needs, but there may be some features that are driven by political needs. So an example that I have is in Fairfax County, there's a commuter parking garage that's currently under construction where the design has been enhanced so that the roof can double as a community event space. And there have even been conversations and plans for that space to be used for movie nights occasionally. And so the design will had to have been accommodated to be able to make that a reality. And so any attributes like that are going to affect your budget. And so those elements of your scope are going to have to be understood as early as possible. And then lastly, creating a good project sketch, like Nii mentioned, having a site layout, that's a really great way to be able to catch things that you may have missed, and just in general, further spell out the details of your design as you progress through defining that scope more. Next.
Proper and timely planning, I couldn't stress them more, are essential for the success of any cost estimate. So you take, for instance, a 6-mile BRT, bus rapid transit project, or you compare that to a 20-mile rail project with 10 stations. Those are two very different projects, very different animals that will require different type of planning, different amounts of time to prepare any particular estimate, whether it's conceptual or whether it's in more detail. So I can't stress it. It's very important to lay out very early on as part of the work that you have to complete, the time it'll take to complete these estimates. At the same time, it is also very important to be able to assemble a team that has the experience, the expertise needed to estimate what your project includes, because that's what is going to help you produce reliable results. The cost estimate team, once assembled, will determine the methodology applicable based on the project definition at that time. So if the cost estimate team is coming on when you have preliminary engineering drawings for a 20-mile rail project with 10 stations. They know that they are at a point where they're still doing conceptual cost estimate. However, if you bring on a team to do the cost estimate for a BRT project that's at 80% design, then of course you have more details, more drawings and specifications. This will be what you call a more deterministic method of approach for the cost estimate. The methods selected, of course, will vary based on the type of cost estimates that are being produced. At the early stages of the cost estimate, we will typically use what we call an order of magnitude methodology or schematic cost estimate, conceptual cost estimate. At these early stages, our estimates are developed using cost models, historical data that has been gathered on similar projects, whereby you know what it's likely to cost for what the unit cost would be per mile, per route mile, if it's rail, and so on. There are also factors, there are capacities that can be utilized, as well as the estimator's judgment, which is why I said it's important that you select a team that has the experience and the expertise. And as the project is better defined and drawings and specifications are produced, the cost estimates will be developed from quantity takeoffs of the individual components that are on the drawings in the specifications in order to develop what we call a comprehensive costing. These estimates are typically called design development estimates, and they eventually become what we call construction document cost estimate or bid cost estimates. Once your project is awarded and execution starts, and doesn't matter whether this is design build, which means you award before design is complete, you're maybe still at 35% design when you award the contract and design continues, or whether it's a design bid build where the design is completed, you still need to develop cost estimates in order to help you manage the budget and control the costs, as well as manage change during a project. Change is inevitable, but it is important to have a good handle on how it is managed. The cost estimate is one of the essential tools to do this. Another essential element of planning is determination of what the efforts are that you will need to complete a particular cost estimate. An experienced team led by an experienced somebody with the expertise will know how to review the scope of the project and assign responsibilities to estimate leads, as well as plan for the execution of the cost estimate, the review, the evaluation, third-party review as needed, and complete summarization into what we call a basis of estimate report. This is one of the vital elements of any cost estimate, because this is where you document the assumptions, the exclusions, the inclusions. As you develop the cost estimates and go to the next phase, some assumptions change, exclusions and inclusions change. This is the document that carries that and keeps it historically for everybody's knowledge. Next. So in order to develop the cost estimate, we must gather data that is needed. Our first steps include quantity determination. This is the quantity of the materials, the labor, and the equipment that are needed to complete this project. Our estimate is developed in form of direct costs and indirect costs. Direct costs comprise of the cost of tangible materials, labor, and equipment that go into completing a particular element of the project. Say, for instance, the completion of the station building, the materials, the labor, the equipment that is utilized to complete every aspect of that station building lies in our direct costs. We also have indirect costs, and these are those that are not directly tangible or accountable to our project. They could be shared by the contractor on two projects. They could be field and home office overhead. They could be bonds, insurances, taxes, project management, and some other things. The sum of our cost estimate includes the direct costs, the indirect costs, as well as some other markups. It is very important to note that our cost data, particularly at the early stages of project definition, can be obtained from industry cost models and databases. Such an example, which is very relevant in our transit industry, is FTA's capital cost database. FTA has spent many years gathering data, cost data, on all their projects. And this is not just the cost to bid the projects, but the as-built costs. So you can imagine that includes the cost of the changes on that project, cost of any scope variations on the project. And this cost database is very useful for you to utilize in developing your feasibility and conceptual cost estimates in particular. Next. On this slide, I have inserted just examples of some excerpts from the FTA cost database, capital cost database. This model will provide conceptual average unit costs, for example, for bus rapid transit or light rail transit. As I mentioned, the data is from actual as-built cost data that has been collected over many years for historical projects. So for example, you can answer a question like, what is the average cost per mile for a new BRT project that has been completed in the last 5 years or 6 years or 10 years? You can go into this database, which is accessible to everybody, and actually select some variables. You can select some projects. You can say you want projects only completed in the last 10 years, and it will give you costs to a particular year of expenditure. This is a very useful tool. Next.
As Nee noted several times, one thing that you can count on in your construction projects is change. Even the simplest projects have risks. Early in the project, before you begin development, before you've engaged an architect or an engineer to help you design your project, it's very difficult to anticipate what some of those risks may be. And that is why in this graphic, your contingencies are much higher early in the project life cycle. And then as you know more about the project and you can gauge what risks may be on your project, what is the likelihood that they'll occur? If Murphy's Law is out there, how much is he going to be on your project? And once you get a better feel for what some of those risks are and can quantify them, the likelihood of their impact and cost, you can then reduce your contingency. Every project has risks, whether it's environmental. A challenging site condition is not just limited to environmental. It could have shallow rock. It could have shallow water table. It could drain to the place where you want to build your facility. Labor shortages are always an issue, especially these days. The schedule. Your schedule drives your cost estimate. Knowing the project development and delivery lifecycle for your particular project, anticipating or be able to forecast your project milestones, knowing the midpoint of when construction may occur is critical to anticipate how much inflation and escalation you should include in your project early on. In that schedule, things like materials, owner supplied materials. There may be certain things that you are going to need to procure to provide to your contractor. All of those things take time, have risks, need to be considered in your estimate. And if you're not able to quantify their cost, should be reflected in your contingency. Utility impacts, third-party agreements, whether it's Cox Cable or Dominion Energy, they are going to take some time and require information up front, and that's going to be an element of cost on your project. Setting aside sufficient contingency to cover the unknowns is critical. It's a theoretical exercise early in the project, and it makes it difficult for some sponsors to really stomach, I have to increase my estimate by 50%. Are you kidding me? That's too much. But it's critical. It's critical up front that if you do not know, when you have a risky project, that you consider sufficient contingency. When you think about the repercussions of having an underfunded project over time, the risk is pushed down the road and you may not be able to advertise your project for construction because it has insufficient funding. So it is difficult early on to think about 50 to 75% contingencies on some of these projects, but it really is critical. A contingency in your estimate should be a line item, just like excavation or stormwater management. Your contingency should be considered in that early estimate and updated over time as the project evolves. The real point of the contingency is to protect you, the owner, from unknowns and unexpected circumstances, as well as risks. We encourage you to engage a construction manager as early as possible in the project development and delivery process. Your construction manager will recommend this line item in a conceptual budget. It's a standard practice from the very beginning to include contingency in your estimate. It also allows for expenses for unknowns and unexpected conditions during construction. You never know when it's going to rain. Based on the sequence of construction, weather sensitive items may fall over the winter, driving up the price. So there is a lot of potential for risk, and where there's a greater need for contingency. Many sources like AACE recommend that you set aside 50% of your project budget for contingencies up front. And it's different for project to project. It is a theoretical exercise, and it requires a lot of thought about what could occur on your project, when it would occur, and then how much that would cost. But the one thing that you can really count on is change are likely during construction. Scope is likely to change during the design, and very few things ever go as well as they're planned or intended. So based on the recognition of this reality, the owner and the construction manager really need to agree on a contingency that has real funding. Don't start out with a construction estimate and then say, well, we're going to fund our $10 million construction estimate, but everyone should understand that there's a possibility that this could increase 50% during the project life cycle. Fund your contingency from the beginning. AACE recommends some contingencies when you begin the project, again at 50%. When you get past your feasibility study and you're about to begin your design and you're developing budgets for your projects, the suggested contingency is plus 30%. When you do get into the design and you begin to either mitigate risks through your solution that you're designing, you design for your risks in the project to mitigate them, or you can quantify them better. You know that structural elements for a canopy for your transit hub require 12 to 16 month lead times. and that could impact the cost of the construction project. You begin to learn how to quantify through the design, and then your contingency can be reduced. The suggested contingency at design, and then as you prepare for bids, is 15%. If you have a construction project that's at a new location where you're not renovating, you're not living in your kitchen while you're rebuilding it, you're building a new site, then the suggested contingency is 10%. If you're renovating your facility and you're working where you're renovating, there's a lot of opportunity for risk, whether it's connections for fire suppression systems or network connectivity, or not having a place for your operators and employees to work during construction as you had planned. The contingency is 15%, it's higher, and it could be higher than that. Certainly Bethel and NEE are used to projects in Northern Virginia that carry a lot of risks, very tight workplaces, and staging is very difficult, and scheduling and performing the work is a challenge. And the contingency may need to be higher for some of those, or down towards Hampton Roads. Certainly that's an issue there as well. So please think about your contingency, include them as a line item in your cost estimate from the very beginning of your project. All right, Danny, next slide.
All right, so documentation. These are both quotes from the cost estimating and assessment guide developed by the U.S. Government Accountability Office that Alan mentioned earlier, and it can be found on FTA's website, and we also have a link at the end of the PowerPoint, but I'll just read these. Documentation provides total recall of the estimate's detail so that it can be replicated by someone other than those who prepared it, and it serves as a reference to support future estimates. And it should describe the cost estimating process, the data sources and methods, and should be detailed enough for someone to easily reconstruct it. And so what good documentation does is it ensures that what you've estimated, what you've created, is not only easily understood, but also easily replicated, that someone else can follow it, that they can understand the assumptions that you've made, and either agree with your methods and values or offer comments on what you've developed. And so a good example of cost estimation documentation that I've posted down here, a snapshot of, is the cost estimate workbook, the CUBE cost estimation workbook for Smart Scale. And this, Smart Scale, the estimates that you provide for Smart Scale are very high level. They're preliminary estimates, but this is an example of an estimate for the construction phase of a project. And you can see that, it's kind of small, but you can see that the disciplines are clearly broken up, like mobilization and survey, roadway, maintenance of traffic, utilities, and then they note the source that they use to develop the estimate for each of those disciplines, whether it's professional judgment, whether it was the STAN estimating tool, PCS, several others. They identify what the defined cost is, what the allowance is, and also what the contingency is, and they're transparent about everything. It's all spelled out. And then they even have other sheets within that spreadsheet where you can note all the assumptions that you're making, and you can further flesh out what your assumed costs are for the different bid items. And so you don't have to create something exactly like this, but I think the elements that are shown here are important to have documented. And just for clarity's sake, when they talk about defined costs and allowance, those are both for known items of your estimate. You know that for example, that you are going to have to, you're going to have an MOT cost, and maybe from historical data on other projects, how much MOT typically costs, what you're typically charged for MOT. So that's going to go into your defined cost. But for a known item that you do not know how much it's going to cost, like maybe that you're going to have to get your utility resized. You have a load letter for Dominion, and that you're going to have to upgrade the infrastructure that you have, but you don't know how much it's going to cost yet. That's something that you're going to put in your allowance. You're going to assume a cost for that item and put it under allowance. And so you fleshed out what is your defined cost, what you are very sure you're going to have to pay for certain items, and then also what you're unsure about, but that you're going to have to pay for that item. And then of course risk, which Alan had already talked about. So these types of things, like having the source, having each of the elements of each phase like fleshed out, knowing what is defined, what you know you're going to have to pay, or what the bid item might be versus what you're unsure about. And then of course your risk and contingency, what you're unsure about, what is unknown, and could potentially cause issues with your project in the future. So these are things that you would want to have identified so that someone else could come in, understand how you created your estimate, and be able to offer feedback on it. Next. Oh, and so this, when updating your estimate, what that can do for your program is to help you identify areas for improvement so that over time, your estimates and your program are going to be more reliable. And so it says here, the purpose of updating it is to check accuracy, defend the estimate, shorten turnaround times as you create like different versions of your estimate, and then archive the data that you use as you note like different variances. Like you can track like the actual cost that you have at major milestones, and just be able to record all of the changes and the lessons learned that you have so that you can inform the next version of that estimate or inform the estimates that you create on your next project. And in general, it's just going to be able to reduce risk over time and provide context for your project so that you can help identify what's changed like through the design of a project, through construction, so that it's going to help you become more accurate, become more reliable on your future projects. So again, like change orders, like tracking those so that you're informed for the next version or for future projects, like any changes with your contract that affected the budget. Again, like major milestones, how did the actual costs of your project affect your budget, and being able to do that, having that high level overview is not only going to help you, but even as you have like staff changes over time, everyone is going to be informed of what occurred and how that can help them create a better estimate moving forward. And over time, you're going to be able to create a strong program. Next.
All right, some cost estimating best practices. We noted from the very beginning, have a plan. Think about how your estimate is going to be developed through the project development and delivery lifecycle, and who is going to be responsible for owning that estimate and who has to approve it. Reach out and find skilled resources. Some of the larger transit agencies have incredible staff who can do cost estimating internally. Some of you smaller transit agencies may not have those resources, but they're there. The VTA members, DRPT also has a very strong bench of consultants. We're all here to help you, and it is critical at the early stages of the project that you have accurate estimates. Clearly define your assumptions, document that. The FTA, the resources that we've shared today, all provide good templates for documenting your assumptions for the project. Schedule for unknowns and try to anticipate, when is construction going to occur? When am I going to design this project? Having a schedule for the project, even considering some contingency in your schedule, is critical because your schedule drives your cost estimate. Don't be too optimistic. We can see through the pandemic that stuff happens, and hopefully we will never have another pandemic. But one thing we can guarantee through the project development and delivery lifecycle is that something will occur. Murphy will kick in, and Murphy's Law will kick in at varying degrees on your projects. Don't be too optimistic. Err on the side of higher contingency. Nee showed the databases and resources, and Bethel did too, with some of the tools that are available. Use those historical data. And whether it's a cost per square foot, whether you're looking at a building, a new maintenance facility, whether you're looking at a charging solution, there's even new data out there for that. You have a large parking lot. There's a lot of historical data there that you can rely on. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. If you don't know, document it as an assumption and rely on some of the information that they shared with you to come up with data for your estimate. Include sufficient contingencies, and we can't overemphasize that enough. Be conservative with your contingencies, budget for them as an item in your schedule, just as you would any other element of the construction project. As your design and your project evolves, update your estimate at key milestones and make sure everyone is aware of that and you continue to get buy-in. Your estimate needs to be all-inclusive. It just doesn't include construction. Your estimate includes AE. It includes owner-supplied materials. It includes utility relocations. It includes temporary work locations during construction. It includes construction management support during the life cycle of your project. Ensure that your estimate is all-inclusive and covers everything that you need throughout the life cycle. And in the early on part of the project, as the design evolves, you can begin to prioritize really on your most expensive items. Structural steel, EV charging. If you have a large site, the earthwork and civil work. Over on the western part of the state, CSPDC, Valley Metro, Blacksburg Transit, they can all tell you about rock excavation. Some of these things are very expensive, but you know that there's a high probability that they can occur. So make sure your estimate includes them. But the key is to start with a plan and have that cost management plan from the very beginning. All right, Danny. Okay, Danny, I know that you shared on this slide where we have references and resources. You shared a slide early on, and I did not note that the VTA website includes the previous programs from the Lunch and Learn series. Danny shared in this slide the YouTube location where you can find those videos. So please, first, if you need a resource, all of these things are going to be stored on YouTube, and you'll be able to go out and review them and let us know if you have any questions. The cost estimation for FTA funded projects. This is a great resource. We do appreciate that some of you have projects that are not FTA funded, but FTA, FHWA, FRA, the Rail Association, all of them that fall under the US DOT's umbrella have some incredible resources and templates and information that you can use when developing cost estimates. The Government Accountability Office, they do have best practices as well for developing comprehensive estimates for the entire project life cycle. AACE, the Association for the Advancement of Cost Engineering, industry established association that provides a lot of information, template, resources, and frameworks for your estimate. The Construction Management Association of America also provides a great framework, tools, templates, and resources for developing cost estimates. And in the webinar, there are links to each of those. So we want to make sure that you have those and can access these previous webinars and this one as well. So Danny, we'll jump to the next slide and see if we have any questions.
Thank you, and Bethel and Nee. We don't have any questions yet. If you have any, please put them in the chat box. Also, we'll upload these presentations to our site along with the YouTube videos so that you're able to click those links or kind of review these presentations while rewatching the programs. All right, no questions. Thank you again on behalf of VTA, Alan, Bethel, and Nee for this presentation, and this will be back up online soon. For those who are participating, if you have any subject topics that you would like more in-depth review on, please let us know, and we'll be glad to kind of put that into a future program. We're very excited about this series continuing and looking for more subject areas to add into future programs. And so thank you again, and thank you again to our presenters, Alan, Bethel, and Nee, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you, Danny.
Thank you.
Thank you all.